the daughter of Milhan ibn Khalid, and she belonged to the clan of the tribe of Khazraj. Her sister was also an eminent companion, as was her brothers. She was married first to a man who was extremely abusive, but from that marriage came forth an eminent companion as well. The Prophet loved her and her family and used to often visit her home. Join Sister Laila Nasheeba as she details the story of Sulaym. Welcome to our class. This is our Seerah class on the Heroines of Islam. The Heroines of Islam. And tonight I'm doing the story of the sister of the woman we did Monday. Monday we spoke about Haram, the daughter of Milhan. And I told you guys that she had a sister, and her sister was known, her real name was Rumaysa, but her kunya was Sulaym. Sulaym. And for those of you who don't know, she was the mother of Anas ibn Malik. She was the mother of Anas ibn Malik. And this woman dedicated her son in the way of Allah. And she started off, with a pretty, familiar beginning. Back in the days, like I told you, this was the medieval period. These were the dark ages. And we tell you guys, me and my cousin Mukhtar, we tell you all the time, it was a different era back then. All people, the Vikings, the Arabs, the Romans, the Persians, the Egyptians, women were of no value. So most of the people killed their daughters. If a woman gave birth to a female child, they would bury it alive, or they'd throw it off a cliff, or they'd kill it, unless they wanted a girl. And if they decided to keep that girl child, back in those days, they would train her. She'd have to be a warrior. She'd have to know how to fight, because if she did not know how to fight, if her tribe or her town or her kingdom was ever under attack, the women and children were the casualties of war. They were taken into slavery back then. The whole world practiced slavery. Women became right-hand possessions and slaves, and they would be prostituted if the man wanted to make money from them, or they'd be a chambermaid, a chamber woman, a slave, a sexual slave to the man. So those were some horrific times in history. Those movies you see from the medieval period, that's how it was, for women and children. So women weren't kept alive unless they wanted to have a female child. Now, of course, they would have a certain amount so they can keep reproducing more of their kind. Okay, but again, the ones who were kept alive, they were trained to fight or trained in poison. When you look at the European history, for example, the women from the royal family, those women from the royal family who could not fight, they became experts in poison. And the women always carried poison attached to their girdle. So in case there was their kingdom or their home was under attack, the woman could slip some, as the man is trying to take possession of her, she would know how to charm him and then slip the poison into his drink or into his food and hope that he would die from that. So, either the women were trained in poison, or they were trained in warfare, or they were trained in both. The Persian women were trained in both. They were known for their poison and their warrior skills. Okay, so this is just how it was back in the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th century. That's just how it was. Islam came When Islam came, Islam gave rights to women. Islam raised women up from that standard. But it was not an overnight process. As you guys are learning in the class on the life of the Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the Caliphate of Abu Bakr, this took time for Islam to spread across the earth, and women and slaves to be given rights and all that conquer and kill and rape stuff to end. But these were some trying times. And this story, the story of this woman I'm going to do today, Sulaym, she's one of the eminent companions. She will be of those 70,000 who will enter paradise without being held accountable. She is one of the first generation of Muslims. What does that mean? That means she's the best of this nation. Allah says in the Quran, the best of this nation were those companions who were with the Prophet. She was with him. And then those who came after them. And then those that came after them. So her faith is stronger than any Muslim on this planet's faith today. And her understanding of Islam is better than any Muslim on this planet. I don't care who you call a sheikh, a scholar, or whatever. They do not, according to Allah, he says it in the Quran, they do not understand this religion better than those original companions. So Sulaym is one of those original companions. And just like the women of her era, as you guys can see, she was a warrior too. Just like her sister, just like the Prophet's wives. These were women allowed to live. So they were trained to fight. The Arabs were a warrior race of people. They were a tribal people. They were a proud people. And they did a lot of fighting, okay? And the women fought along with them. So her story, many of you will be able to relate to because her beginning wasn't too good. She was one of those companions that was mistreated because of her faith. And she was oppressed and physically abused by her husband. Okay? And we're going to talk about that. So, and also this woman is special because Allah allowed many miraculous occurrences to happen through her hand or in her presence. So that shows how Allah loved this woman too. And her children were loved, and her husband, the second husband. So let me put the PowerPoint up on the screen so everyone can see. And I'm going to put my screen down. But wait a minute, let me set this up. The people in Zoom, I keep forgetting to do you guys first. I'm going to share you guys with Facebook today because since my Facebook page is open. Wait a minute. Let me go to Sunnahfollowers. Where? Oh, this is the Zoom room. Okay. This is Facebook, right? Let me make it play. Okay. There's Facebook. Okay. And for the rest of us, let me take everything down off the screen. And I'm going to put us to this for a minute. Just a minute. And I'm going to calm it down. With, if I can find it, this, yeah. And now we're going to go to the PowerPoint. Inshallah, you guys will see my PowerPoint in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to make it big screen and make sure you print this out, and everything that I'm teaching you about this sister, all of this information can be found in the authentic hadiths. You can find all of this information in Sahih Bukhari, in Sahih Muslim, and Muwatta. Those are the 3 books I mainly use for my companion stories. Muwatta goes into a lot of great detail, And of course, so does Bukhari and Muslim. 85% of the knowledge of Islam is in Sahih Bukhari alone. And I usually get the other 20% from Sahih Muslim and Muwatta when I'm teaching about these companions. So let me take this full screen so everybody can see. I'm going to make it like this. Yeah, that'll make it easier. And I want y'all to look at the pictures I generated. One of the sisters asked me, what is a shift? Because when you read in Sahih Bukhari, it speaks about how Aisha, radiyallahu anha, and Sulaym, and a lot of the female companions wore a shift. It doesn't say abaya, it says shift. And a lot of you ask me, what's a shift? This is a shift. It's just a dress. A shift is just a dress that comes all the way down to the ground. And it had sleeves. Okay, this is a shift. Like I told you, it's no different than what you sisters from Somali wear. It looks like something that Israel would have on, doesn't it? Israel has a dress like this. It's just a one piece, what you guys call a batu or something. That's all it is. It's just a dress, a one-piece dress. It comes all the way down to the ground. And this is how the Arabic women would dress sometimes after the verses of hijab came down. Like I said, the Prophet's wives did not, I repeat, they did not, I repeat, they did not cover their faces. They did not wear burqas. That's not part of the Arabic dress. I know, I'm Arabic. They did not, that's Turkish, not Arabic. But this is what they would wear. The shift. And this thing around her waist, this is what they call the girdle. You guys remember when we did the story of Asma, radiyallahu anha, Aisha's sister, when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and her father snuck away to migrate to Medina, she tied their food, she took her girdle off and tore it in half. This is the girdle that the women would wear. And inside this girdle, guys, on the side would be a place to hold their knives, their daggers, and also poison. Poison, because these were the dark ages. When the verses of hijab came down, the Arabic women started covering their hair, but they made sure that their hijabs came down to cover their bosom. The only time you would see a woman looking like this is if she was ready to fight on the battlefield. And I'm using this picture on purpose because I'm going to get to this story right here with this sister, Sulaym. The only time you would see that girdle tight around them like that and that hijab pulled back is if they on the battlefield fighting in a shift. And that's the shift. So when you read those hadiths in Bukhari, for example, it says during the Battle of Badr, one of the companions said, we could see Aisha, radiyallahu anha, skirting over the battlefield, trying to provide water to the men, to the sick, to the fallen. She would lift up her shift. She would lift up her shift so high that you could see the calf of her leg as she hurried to get to the fallen men. That hadith is in Sahih Bukhari, and it's authentic. And yes, this is a shift. She was a nurse. Aisha was a nurse, and she'd have to lift her dress up to get over the dead bodies. They were talking about the fallen, the bodies, because remember, Allah sent the angels. The angel Jibril and all the other archangels fought alongside the companions during the Battle of Badr. And so there were dead Quraysh all over. And Aisha was rushing to get to the wounded Muslims. But this is a shift. That's why I use this picture. I generated this with a shift. And again, I put this picture here. Y'all see this face here? This is the war makeup. Like I told you, Muslim women and all women have always worn makeup. Makeup is not haram. Women have been wearing makeup since the beginning of time. And this is one of the ways that they would make themselves up. You know, this is the warrior look. They would put on whatever tribal, just like the Africans today have their tribal war paint. Okay, same thing. The Vikings had this too. The Romans, Persians, Arabs, all people back then. They had their war face paint or whatnot. So you would see after the verses of hijab came down, this is probably how Amara dressed. I did Amara's story last week. She probably looked like this because she was all part of this army. So she probably would decorate her face like this and wear her hijab like that, and along with her armor. This right here is what they call a ninja. This is what we would call a ninja. And there were a lot of female warriors back in the 6th, 7th, 8th century. Not just amongst the Arabs, but the Persians, the Vikings, the Greeks, the Romans. Women would dress up, and the men too, like this. And they would have knives in their hands, and they would always cover their face so you don't see who the assassin is. This is an assassin. Okay, so I use these pictures again just to give y'all an idea of the history. And like I said, you can generate these pictures yourself by typing in whatever decade. I typed 8th century woman battlefield. This is what comes up. Because this is how they dressed during the 8th century. And I typed shift because I wanted y'all to see what a shift is. Okay, but we'll get to this picture because this is probably how Sulaym looked during the Battle of Uhud, because she was one of the women that defended the Prophet when the men ran away. And we're going to talk about that during the Battle of Uhud. So this is her story. Sulaym, the daughter of Milhan. She's the sister of Haram. Okay, let's start it off. Again, even before Islam was introduced to Medina, Yathrib is the name that used to be the name for Medina, as Mukhtar told you guys the other day. Even before Islam was introduced to Medina, Rumaysa, which was her name, her kunya is Sulaym. Rumaysa was known for her great character, also her intelligence and her independent attitude. And she had many different nicknames because of her character, because of her intelligence and her ability to fight. They called her Rumaysa, and all of that. But we know her through the hadiths as Sulaym. Some people say her name was Sahla too. But we know her as Sulaym, the mother of Sulaym. And we're going to talk about her son named Sulaym and the hadith about him in a minute. So, Sulaym, when the word of Islam came to Medina, remember, she's not from Mecca, she's from Medina. When the word of Islam came, she was married to a man named Malik ibn An-Nadr. And she had a son by him. Y'all know who he was? Anas ibn Malik. Anas ibn Malik, who was one of the great companions of the Prophet. She was his mother, and his father was Malik ibn An-Nadr. When Sulaym heard that a prophet had appeared professing to believe La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, she was one of the first women to accept Islam. She was influenced by Musab ibn Umair. Remember, Allah, the Prophet sent Musab as one of the first messengers. The first messengers of the Prophet sent to teach the people dawah, to give dawah to the people of Medina. Well, she was one of the women just like Nusayba, Amara. Amara. Remember, we talked about how when Amara gave that pledge of allegiance at Aqaba, it was her and another woman. Sulaym was the other one. Okay? So, Sulaym was one of the first women, along with Nusayba, whose name was also Amara, to accept Islam through the persuasion of Musab. And she and Nusayba, they made that first pledge. This was after the first pledge of Aqaba. Remember, we talked about how 12 men of Medina had gone to Aqaba on the outskirts of Mecca to give their allegiance to the Prophet. Well, you know, she and Nusayba were with those men. Okay? And that's an important point to remember, because remember, so many of you sisters are being told that as a Muslim woman, we're not supposed to be seen. So many of you women are being told by men today that when you leave the house, it's supposed to be as if you are a jinn. It's supposed to be as if you are unseen. This is not Islam. Allah did not make any mistakes in his creation. Allah did not make women to be unseen. If he wanted us to be unseen, we would have been jinn, because jinn are part of the unseen world. We are human beings. We are part of the seen world. And like I tell you, when you learn these hadiths, that's why it's important to learn these hadiths. You will see that the Prophet and his wives and all the female companions, they were not invisible. Sulaym was one of the two women that came forward and pledged her allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad. He told her, I do not shake hands with women, but you women have to adhere to the same standards as the men. So these women were not invisible. Nowhere does the Prophet or Allah say that we have to walk out the house and be invisible. Whatever brothers or men are telling you that, these are men who have mental problems today. Something is wrong with them. You need to question what's wrong with that man for telling you that. And if you had knowledge of your deen, you would think, how can I be unseen when I'm part of the seen world? Allah didn't make mistakes in his creation. You were saying Allah made a mistake making me visible? He made a mistake making me a human instead of a jinn? Y'all women better get it together. Well, Sulaym was visible. And she made the decision to accept Islam without the knowledge or consent of her husband, Malik. Malik was away on business when Sulaym went and gave her allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when he came back home, he could tell something had changed inside the home. And remember, this is when women did not have rights. This is before Allah sent down the verses of the Quran giving women rights. The right to be treated nicely, the right to be respected. But her husband wasn't Muslim anyway. So when he came home, he asked his wife, what's wrong with you? Have you been rejuvenated or something? She said, no, but I have taken on a new way of life. She said, I believe in this man, the Prophet Muhammad, and I have declared my allegiance to him. Her husband was angry. And he told her, I didn't tell you to do this. And she went back and forth with him, arguing, letting him know this was her decision. And not only did she embrace Islam, but her son, Anas, was a little boy. She began to teach him what the new faith too. She taught her son to say, La ilaha illallah, and ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and all of that. And of course, this made her husband angry. And as a result, he began to beat her. Beat her. Pay attention to this picture here. This is how the Arabic women dressed in the 8th century in Medina. This is how they dressed. They did not cover their faces. Burqa is not part of Arabic culture. Nowhere does Allah command a woman to cover her face. But if a woman wanted to cover her face, she would simply take her hijab and just, hold it in her hand and cover it and take it down. Okay, but this is how they dress. You see how the neck is covered. We cover our necks, sisters. Your neck is supposed to be covered, and your hijab is supposed to be over your bosom. Allah says, draw your veils over your bosom. And I want y'all to see the kohol. This is the kohol. All Arabic women wore makeup, and they still do. You go to any place in the Arabian world, and you see Arab women love their coat. Look at Layla. I don't leave home without it. I even sleep in it. Oh, yeah. But this is how they looked. They wore kohol just like this. Okay? So, Sulaym, her husband was angry that she took on this new religion. And he was even angrier to see her teaching it to his son. So he told her, don't corrupt my son. And there were many violent scenes inside the house. He used to beat her up. They used to fight, but she stood her ground. Arabic women fought back. Arabic women fought back. Arabic women fought back, guys. They didn't sit there and take the beating. So there were a lot of violent scenes between her and her husband because she stood her ground and she refused to denounce her new way of life. Finally, her husband left her and went to Syria, and Allah caused him to be killed. We don't know what happened. All we know, the hadith says that some enemies that he made in Syria attacked him and murdered him. When the news got back to Sulaym that her husband had been murdered, she didn't, she wasn't upset. Because, in fact, she felt good riddance. Because, I'm a Muslim. And this is before Allah sent down the verses saying that Muslim women cannot be with a non-Muslim man. Remember, the verses of those verses didn't come down to later, to after Uhud. Okay? And we'll talk about Uhud in a minute. But alhamdulillah, Allah eased her from that violent marriage because Allah caused her husband to be killed. And she was kind of happy. She remained devoted to her son and continued to teach him the religion. In fact, there's a hadith that says she was so devoted to her son that she said she would never get married again unless her son approved of it. And he was just a little boy. When the word got out that Sulaym was widowed, and by the way, they say she was extremely beautiful, her and her sister, all of the bent mill hands were beautiful. They say when the word got out that she had been made a widow, one man whose name was Abu Talhah, he became excited because he wanted to marry her. And he knew what a beautiful, good woman she was. So he was determined to marry her before anybody else would ask. And just so you know, this is the Abu Talhah who was very wealthy. He was very rich and wealthy in Medina. And he was confident that Sulaym would never turn him down because of his money and because of the beautiful house he had. And he was also a good horseman. You know, the Arabs that had money, the rich Arabs were excellent horsemen. And he was also a good warrior. And he also came from the same tribe that Sulaym came from, the tribe of Niger. So he was arrogant and confident that she wouldn't turn him down. So he went to her house. And on the way, he recalled that she had been influenced. He thought about it. Wait a minute. This woman took on a new religion. He had just remembered. He said she is following this man that claims to be a prophet. But he said, that's okay. Her husband died, and he was from the old religion. And, you know, that ain't going to stand in the way. So that's how confident Abu Talhah was that she would marry him. So he went to her house and he asked permission to come in. Her son, Anas, allowed him to come in. And her son asked him, why are you here? And Abu Talhah explained that he had come to ask for his mother's hand in marriage. His mother heard him. And she came out and she said, Abu Talhah, a man like you is not easy to turn down. She said, but I shall never marry you because you are a kafir. You are an unbeliever and I am a Muslim. I could never marry a kafir. Abu Talhah was shocked because he'd never been turned down before. Remember, the Arabs had harems of women. They had many women. So he had never had a woman turn him down. He was handsome. He was rich, wealthy, a warrior, proud. So he said, it must be somebody else. He said, what is it that's really preventing you from marrying me, Sulaym? He said, is it the yellow and the white? That means, is it the gold and the silver? He said, if it's the yellow and the white, I can give you that 3 times over. And she said, the gold and the silver? She said, I swear to you, Abu Talhah, and I swear by Allah and his messenger, that if you were to convert to Islam, I will be pleased to accept you as a husband. And I won't even ask for your gold and your silver. She said, if you convert to Islam, I will take your conversion as my dowry. Subhanallah. You see that? So she was letting him know she could care less about his money. And by the way, she was rich too. Remember, we talked about her and her sister, the Milhans. The Milhans were a very upper class family too. She wasn't as wealthy as he was, but she was no poor lady either. So when she told Abu Talhah that she would marry him without even a dowry if he converted to Islam, his mind began to think about the idol that he had just made from wood, that he used to worship, that was at home in his house. And Sulaym, she said, don't you know, Abu Talhah, that the God you worship besides Allah came from the earth? He said, yeah. She said, it's made out of wood, isn't it? He said, yeah. It came from a tree, right? Yeah. It came from the earth, right? He said, yeah. She said, then don't you feel stupid that you're worshiping part of a tree and you use the rest of that tree to make bread and to make fire so you can cook bread for yourself? Remember how I told you guys, this is how the prophet broke down the names of Allah. You have to pretend like you're dealing with a kafir. Make them think that he's the only one worthy of worship. How can you worship a piece of wood that you have to use to burn and it burns to cinders? The real Allah doesn't do that. Okay? So she told him, she said, if you should give up those foolish thoughts of yours and become a Muslim, she said, I would then accept you as a husband, and I would not want anything from you except your conversion. And that's it. He said, well, if I do convert to Islam, who's going to teach me about this religion? She said, I will teach you. And he said, how can you teach me? She said, just utter the declaration of truth. Just testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And then go to your house and destroy your idol. Throw it away. That's the first thing. And remember, we talked about that in our Wala Wabara class. The first thing that you teach people about Islam is what it means to believe in Allah and worship Him alone. You don't talk about polygamy. You don't talk about the prayer and stuff yet. You have to first convince the people that Allah is the only one worthy of worship. That's how the companions did. That's how Sulaym did here. So Abu Talhah went home and he thought about what Sulaym said. And then he came back to her. He said, "Oh, Sulaym, I have taken your advice to heart, and I declare that there is no God but Allah, and I declare that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." And so then after that, she kept her word. Her and Abu Talhah were married, and her son Anas was happy. And the Muslims used to say, we have never heard of a dowry that was more valuable and more precious than the dowry of Sulaym, because Islam was her dowry. Subhanallah. You'll find that hadith in Sahih Muslim. Subhanallah. You see how righteous these people were. You see why Allah says that they are the best of this nation. You see how there's no man or woman on this planet who can out-trump any of these companions. If Sulaym speaks to everybody else, shut up and sit down. If Sulaym gives a statement about this deen, no one on this planet today can out-trump her. Y'all understand that? Sulaym was happy and delighted with her new husband, who placed all his energy and talent into servicing Islam. Her husband, Abu Talhah, he's mentioned in so many hadiths. He was one of the 73 men who swore allegiance to the Prophet at the second pledge of Aqaba. And of course, his wife, Sulaym, was with him. Two other women, Nusayba and also Asma bint Amir. I'm going to do her story next week for you guys. Asma bint Amir was another woman that gave her pledge. Like I said, the Arabic women were never invisible. They were not a people who would be put in a corner. You couldn't put no Arabic woman in the corner, and you can't put them in the corner today either. It's not in their nature. They're warriors by nature. Hello. So I don't know where these brothers come from with all this invisibility, this jinn seeking. And you see, ain't none of them married to no Arabic women. All these brothers making those comments to you, ain't not one of them got an Arabic wife, because an Arabic woman wouldn't tolerate such nonsense. So her husband, Abu Talhah, he was devoted to the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he took enormous delight in looking at him and listening to him speak. Her husband, Abu Talhah, participated in all the major battles. He lived a very ascetic life, and he was known to fast for long periods at a time. Remember, you guys know the famous hadith about the man who had a beautiful orchard in Medina with beautiful date palms and grapes and a running water. One day, while this man was performing prayer in the shade of the trees, a beautiful bird with brightly colored feathers flew in front of him. He became so engrossed in the scene of the bird that he forgot how many rakats he prayed. After he finished his prayer, he went to the prophet and said, "O prophet of Allah, I have been distracted." And this is also when Allah sent down the verses of the Quran talking about who would make a beautiful sacrifice for the sake of Allah. Well, this was her husband, Abu Talhah. He said, "Bear witness, O messenger of Allah, that I hand over this orchard as a charity for the sake of Allah." So her husband was Abu Talhah, and he was also given the good news of paradise too. These were the best of this nation. No person on this planet today out trumps either one of them or their children. Okay. Now, remember, we talked about how her first husband, before she married Abu Talha, he had been killed in Syria. Well, after her first husband had been killed, Sulaym was left with just her son to raise on her own. And she knew that a boy needed a man in his life. So she dedicated her son. She went to the prophet and said, "O prophet of Allah, my son Anas, I dedicate him to service you." And so for the next 10 years of his life, Anas was the one who carried the water for the prophet to make his wudu with and stuff. He spent his life servicing the prophet. This is what I tell a lot of you single sisters. A lot of you single sisters will ask me, "Sister Laila, I have a son, or I have sons at home and I don't have a husband. What can I do?" I tell you, take your sons to the mosque and dedicate them to help at the mosque. Ask the imam, does he need someone to clean the mosque? Someone to help call the adhan? Does he need someone to help at the mosque? How many of us think to dedicate our sons to service Allah? My mother did it to my brother. I grew up in the 60s. We were born and raised Muslim. Nobody knew what Muslims were back then because I grew up in the worst part of America's history, the civil rights. The only thing people knew about was Elijah Muhammad. I wasn't no Elijah Muhammad. I was upon Siratul Mustaqim. My mother took my brother to the mosque and she dedicated him. He was what, 8, 10 years old? Dedicated him. She said, "Imam, here's my son. I will bring him up here on the weekends. He can call the adhan. He can help clean. He can help do whatever is needed in the way of Allah. Help give dawah, whatever is needed." But see, that was the 60s and 70s. Nowadays, you women don't think to do that. You don't think to dedicate your children, your sons, to service Allah. Okay? And that's why our kids today are ruined. Well, Sulaym dedicated her son to the service of the prophet after her husband was killed because her son needed a father, a man to look up to. She requested the prophet to make dua to Allah for an increase in knowledge for her son. She said, "O prophet, pray for him to have the best in this world and the next." And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, and Allah answered his supplications because Anas was one of the original companions. He became also one of the scholars of Islam, and he lived to the age of 103. And Anas had 80 children. They got married a lot. Companions didn't play. Okay? He had 80 children. He lived to be 103 years old, and he had a big, beautiful palace in Persia, and he had beautiful gardens, and he liked the nice things in life. He used to dress well, and he always dyed his hair. And all his sons became scholars of the deen. And again, Anas too, just like his mother and his stepfather and his brother, were given the good news of paradise. So that shows you ain't got to be no poor pauper either. Anas had a nice life. He was not a poor dude. His mother was rich. He came from a rich lifestyle, and he lived a good lifestyle. But he kept Allah first and foremost. Pay attention. Now we get to the shift and the sword. Abu Talhah and Sulaym had an exemplary Muslim family life. Whereas her first husband and her used to fight all the time, her and Abu Talhah, it was effortless. Sometimes the second time around is better. I know we're always looking for that good relationship. Sometimes it may take 3, 4, 5, 6 tries. She found it on the second try, okay? Abu Talha and Sulaym were happy. They were devoted to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to the Muslims and to Islam. Remember, the companions understood wala wa better. They had their allegiance to Allah, their allegiance to the Prophet and each other intact. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to come and visit her in Abu Talha's home. And sometimes when the time for prayer came, he would pray on a mat given by Sulaym. Sometimes he would take a nap at their house. And as he slept, she would come. Remember, I told y'all this. Remember, her sister, by the way, her sister lived with them. Remember, I told you, we went over her sister story, Haram. Y'all see, they were rich. They had a big, beautiful home. They lived, her sister was not married at the time, and she lived with her sister and her son and her husband, okay? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sometimes come to visit and sleep, and Sulaym would wipe the sweat from his forehead. And once when he woke up, he asked her, he said, "What you doing?" She said, "I am taking the drops of your sweat as a blessing, because it comes from you, O Messenger of Allah." There's another hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to their house, the Milham house, and Sulaym offered him some dates and butter fat. But he did not have any of it because he was fasting. And she would often send her son Anas with bags of dates. Remember, she was wealthy. And y'all remember, the Prophet would give everything away. And knowing how he would never keep anything for himself, Sulaym would always send a bag of dates to him. Everybody realized how attached the Prophet was to Sulaym and her sister and their family. So one of the companions asked him, "Why are you so attached to them?" He said, "Because her brother," and I gave you that story the other day, "her brother died. He was killed beside me, defending me. So he felt obligated to look out, for this family because their brother died protecting him." And on the occasion of the Prophet's final pilgrimage, when he shaved his head, her husband, Abu Talha, collected his hair and took it back to Medina, and he gave it to his wife, Sulaym, and she kept it as a memento. And to this day, if you got that hair that they got in a glass jar, they say that was the hair she had. They got the Prophet's hair in a glass jar today preserved. That's the hair that she had. Okay. Also, we have another hadith where her son Anas tells us that one day the prophet came to visit them, and he took a drink of water from a leather bowl in the courtyard. Sulaym cut out that section of the bowl that he drank from and preserved it too. You know, she loved the Prophet Muhammad. They all did. And being a prophet, anything he touched became like a miracle. It's the same thing you and I would do. If I were living and he were living today, I would try to grab his hair too and keep it as a memento. I would try to grab his sweat too. If he blew his nose, I'd want to keep the tissue because he was the messenger of Allah. So, not only was Sulaym a good wife, not only was she a good mother, not only was she a good Muslim, but she was a warrior. Like I said, learn the history of the Arabs. They were a warrior race, still are. Look at me. Okay. Sulaym, she was known for her courage and bravery. During the Battle of Uhud, she carried a dagger in the fold of her dress. And you will find this story in Bukhari, Muslim, and Muwatta. She was out on the, like Aisha, radiallahu anha, because like Aisha, Sulaym was also a nurse. A lot of the women were skilled in medicine and poison. I keep telling y'all, poison too. Well, she was a nurse like Aisha. And during the Battle of Uhud, she was giving water to the wounded. And she kept making sure that the prophet was okay. And this was the battle in which the men left the prophet on the battlefield. Remember, we talked about that. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was left alone, Amira, that's Nushayba, and also the prophet's aunt Safiya, they were the first to run on the battlefield to protect him. And also Sulaym, she threw down her water bowl, pulled out her dagger, and she had on her shift, and she too stood and defended him when the men ran off. And her, Amira, and Safiya, and Amira's husbands and sons defended him until Abu Bakr and Ali came. Because Abu Bakr and Ali were trying to get to him, but they couldn't because they were fighting. But they finally got to him. Okay? She also participated in the Battle of the Ditch. During the Battle of the Ditch, the prophet saw her carrying a dagger. She was known for her dagger. And he said, Sulaym, what you gonna do with that dagger? She said, it's to fight anyone who runs away. She said, they ran away and left you alone at Uhud. She said, anyone who runs and leaves you alone here, I'm going to stab him myself with my dagger. And that's how she stood. And the prophet laughed. He said, may Allah be pleased with you, Sulaym. Like I said, these women were warriors. You had to be. These were the dark ages. You had to be a warrior if you were a female. Otherwise, you'd be a slave. I'd rather die than be somebody's bed mate. Okay? And here's another picture of how the houses looked. And I had this picture generated. I wrote in there 8th century Medina home, wealthy home. This is how the people of her stature lived in houses like this in the 8th century. Okay. Sulaym was very happy in her second marriage. And her and Abu, and I know you guys remember this hadith. This hadith is in Sahih Bukhari too. Like I told you, everything I got on her came from straight from the hadiths. Sulaym, her and Abu Talhah, they were blessed with a son named Abu Umair. Abu Umair. One day the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came to visit her and her husband, and he found Abu Umair looking sad. So he asked him, "Oh, Abu Umair, what's wrong?" And Sulaym told him that his pet bird, he had a pet bird that he used to play with. She said the bird that he had as a pet, it died. He let it out its cage and he played with it and it died. And the Prophet said, oh Abu Umair, father of the bird. That's what Abu Umair means, father of the bird. Because he was always holding that bird in his hand as a little boy. The Prophet said, "Oh, Abu Umair, where's your little bird? Where's your little bird?" So that shows how the Prophet was good even with the children. One day, Abu Umair became sick and his temperature shot up very high and he died. This little boy never reached puberty. He was maybe around 7, 8 years old. Sulaym was very patient. She told her slaves, "Do not let anyone know that my son has died." She said, "Because I don't want Abu Talhah to find out. I want to be the one to tell him because he's away on a journey. I want to make sure that when I tell him, he's well rested." So when her husband came home, he asked, "How is our son?" And she said, "He's sleeping. He's sleeping quietly." And she cooked him a nice meal. And she talked with him. And she laid with him. And they went to sleep. And then the next morning is when she told him, "Our son died while you were gone." Abu Talha became angry. Y'all remember this hadith? Okay. The Abu Talha became angry and he asked her, "Why didn't you let me know?" So he went to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and told the Prophet, "Look what Sulaym did. Why didn't she let me know that my son had died when I got home?" The Prophet said, "Because she was looking out for you, for your best interest. She didn't want to burden you down until after you got some rest from your journey." And then the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made dua. And he said, "Abu Talha, did you and your wife have relations last night?" Abu Talha said, "Yes." Guess what? From that relation, she gave birth to another son. And that son lived. His name was Abdullah. See how Allah blessed them. Allah giveth and Allah taketh away to test us, guys. Because she dealt with that with patience. Because she thought about pleasing her husband. Remember, sisters, we should try to make our husbands happy. Our husbands, if you married to a good one, our husbands work. If you married to one that work, nowadays the men ain't doing their job. But if you married to a husband and he works, he's your provider, he's your maintainer, he's going through a lot of stress to take care of you. You know, try to make life easy for him, please him, satisfy him, give him the bad news gently. Because she did that, Allah blessed them with another son. And guess what? That son was named Abdullah. And that son lived. He grew up and he had 9 sons. And all of his sons were Hafiz. They all memorized the Quran with meaning. So you see how Allah blesses us. He blessed Sulaym and Abu Talha with grandchildren who were all scholars. Also, there's another hadith. I found all these hadiths Anas tells us that his mother had a goat. One day she made some butter from its milk and she put it in a leather bowl. When it was full, she sent it as a gift to the prophet with her adopted daughter. And again, this is the Arabs used to adopt children before Allah sent down the verses making it haram. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the butter and told his family to go ahead and eat it and return the bowl back with the little girl. The little girl brought the empty bowl back and hung it on a nail in the kitchen. Later that night, Sulaym saw that the bowl was still hanging and it was full. In fact, it was overflowing with butter. So she asked her daughter, why didn't you take that butter to the prophet? The little girl said, I did. And he took the butter. Sulaym was amazed by this. So she went to the prophet's home and told him, she said, did you get the butter? He said, yes. And she explained to him how the bowl was back full. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her, he said, don't be surprised, Sulaym. That was a gift from Allah sent to you for sharing your butter with me. Allah caused that miracle to happen as a way of thanking you. And by the way, guys, she ate that butter for 2 months. Her and her family were able to eat for 2 months from that butter. So this is one of the miracles. We had a sister ask about the miracles of the prophet. This is one of the miracles of the prophet. Like I said, Sulaym witnessed many. She witnessed this one. She witnessed the one by getting pregnant. And then here's another one. We also have the hadith that one day Abu Talhah came home. And he told Sulaym that the prophet was weak, didn't have no food to eat. And he asked if there was any food in the house. You guys remember this hadith? This is Bukhari and Muslim too. So she told him that all she had was some bread. So she gave him the loaf of bread and told him, here, take this to the prophet. Abu Talhah went to the mosque and invited the prophet to come home and join him for some bread. The prophet accepted and brought the people at the mosque with him. Y'all remember this miracle. When Abu Talhah and Sulaym saw all these other companions following him, they knew that they didn't have enough food. But subhanallah, the prophet made dua and called all 10 of the people to come in. They all came in and that bread ended up being enough for all 10 of the people. In fact, it was enough for 80 people. 80 people came and ate their fill. And there was still food left over. So this is another miracle that happened at the hand of Sulaym. See what a righteous woman she was? Also, this is another hadith. The source, Bukhari and Muslim. Remember, we talked about how the prophet married Zaynab, radiallahu anha. And remember when he married Zaynab, it was Sulaym. She was the one that made a dish of dates and ghee and sent it to him as a gift. Also, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married Safiya, remember we did the story of the Prophet's wife Safiya. Remember she was dressed as a bride? It was Sulaym who dressed her up as a bride. So I told you we would get back to her when we did the story of Zaynab and Safiya. I told you guys you would hear her name again. This is the same Sulaym. And also she took part in the Battle of Hunayn. She carried a spear. And when Abu Talhah saw her with the spear, he said, Prophet, look at my wife. She got a spear. So the Prophet asked her, what you going to do with that spear? She said, O Prophet of Allah, If any enemy comes before me, I'm going to slice his belly open. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam laughed. This hadith is Bukhari and Muslim. And again, I put these hadiths in so y'all can see the Muslim women were not invisible. They were not invisible. So I don't know where these men of 2024 get off telling you women to be jinn. I don't get it. The Prophet didn't tell no woman to be invisible. Sulaym had another son we talked about, Abdullah. After she had given birth to him, this is where the Aqiqah occurs. Y'all remember that? The hadith whereas the Prophet, a woman had given birth to a child, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam placed the baby on his lap, and he took a date, chewed it, and put it in the baby's mouth, and the baby sucked it. That was her son, Abdullah. Now does all the hadiths make sense? So you can see Sulaym, she was right there with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, her and her sister. They were not invisible. They participated on the battlefield. They birthed and had babies. He came and played with their children. He joked with them, laughed with them, gave them the good news of paradise. He never told any woman to go and pretend as if she don't exist. And again, Abdullah grew up and had 8 children. All of them memorized the Quran. So you can see, and all of this is taken from the authentic hadiths. Sulaym was a model Muslim. She was a model wife, a model mother. Her belief in Allah was strong. She would never compromise her faith for anyone or anything. She participated in helping to pave the way for you and me. She was devoted to the Prophet and even dedicated her son to his service. She educated her children. And this is important. A lot of you women today get lost in the Western lifestyle. You're so busy working, trying to make that money, when you got to remember your first priority are your children. You should be teaching your children what wala, badr is, teaching them about the fitra, helping to guide your children to that light within their heart. Because that's what these women did. Yeah, they fought on the battlefield, but when they were done, they went home and took care of their children and pleased their husbands. Arabic women are masters in the area of love making. Hello, there's a book called The Perfume Garden. It's our masterpiece. You sisters got to know how to do your job. You so busy trying to be like these Western women. That's why you're allowing Muslim men to strip you down to nothing. Because if you were like these women, you wouldn't allow a man to take you down and strip you down. In fact, he wouldn't be able to. You'd be out of his league. So we need to learn from these female companions. Learn from Sulaym. Learn from her sister Haram. Learn from the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were active. They were visible. They were right there with the Prophet Muhammad, talking to him, laughing with him, joking with him. They were seen by the other men too. They weren't sitting around trying to be hidden. They weren't sitting around trying to be jinn. They didn't allow nobody to put them in the corner. Don't nobody put Arab baby in the corner. I tell y'all that. Y'all got to stop letting these men put you in a corner. Something wrong with you. And those men that's doing it, they ain't got no Arab wife, do they? They married to American women. Yeah. Those Arab men that's telling y'all that crap, are they married to Arab women? No. Arab women in their country wouldn't have them. Hello! Just like Laila Nasheeba wouldn't have them. Hello! Give me my dagger. That's how they'd roll. All right. Okay, we're going to stop right here. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.